All right, can everybody hear me now? All right, sorry, when I muted everybody, I muted myself as well. So I guess we'll start from the beginning then. Again, this is Madeline Russell. I'm the Regional Collaborative Project Manager for SHIP. This is our last motivational interviewing webinar series, so I appreciate you guys for all sticking with us for the last 3 sessions, and we hope that you guys have found some value in this and have been able to use it in your own lives. Just some brief things before Jane starts. I will be sending out a evaluation of this webinar series after the call today. It's going to be a brief, probably 5-minute or 5-question survey just to get some feedback to see how this has went for you, if or what future topics you'd like to see for webinars. So I'll go ahead and I did self-mute everybody, so if you guys do have questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself or type it in the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar. But now I'll turn it over to Jay.
Okay, so take 2. This is our last session on motivational interviewing, and like I said, I'm excited to be here to kind of wrap this up with you guys. We're going to talk about some change plans, action plans, and kind of an overview, just review some motivational interviewing principles. So when I talk about change and action plans, I know some of you are nurses, or maybe you do other kind of action or care plans in your work already. And so we're going to be talking about that, but really in the context of behavior change rather than maintenance of a health condition or specific health outcomes. So that's kind of where we're going to go, a little the same but different. And my objectives for this session are really to kind of look at some more questions about how to elicit health behavior change with your clients that you work with. We talked about last week the elicit, provide, elicit format of information exchange and education. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more and what those kind of question stems might look like. We're going to look at some different types of change, action, and coping plans for behavior change. We're going to look at some brief motivational interviewing frameworks because sometimes we don't have a lot of time to do our motivational interviewing, but we still want to offer that support with each client interaction. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're just going to wrap up doing some basic review of things that we've talked about and the foundational aspects of motivational interviewing. But before we get started, I would like to know if anybody did their homework last week, which was to practice the elicit, provide, elicit format of interaction with your client, and then also to use the agenda setting framework if you weren't already doing that. If you did do that, I would be interested to see what your experience was with that. And if you could take a minute and type that in the chat box or verbally say that, that would be wonderful. Okay, well, I didn't see anybody sharing, so I don't know if that means you didn't do your homework or you don't want to share, but either way, I would be interested if you found that technique useful, so you can always share that later throughout the webinar. Okay, so we were going to have a role play exercise, but that did not happen this time, which is okay. I had some scenarios that I had developed where we could do some role playing, and maybe I'll send those out after this. And if you guys want to do that on your own with your coworkers, we could do that. Just to practice some motivational interviewing concepts in kind of a safe space where you can talk about what you're doing with your coworker and kind of practice some of those things. So now we're going to move on to eliciting health behavior change. So like I said, last week we had elicit, kind of eliciting from the client what they already know about their health condition. That's the first part of elicit, provide, elicit. And so there's some things we can do in that elicit part. One is the content we really want to know when we're trying to help our clients change their behavior is to really understand what they know about their health condition. Just because somebody's not engaged in managing their health in a productive way does not mean they don't understand their health condition. So sometimes we really just need to get that foundation. What do they understand first? And then we can go on and provide other information that's important and may apply to the context of their life. And as part of that, we need to establish rapport. That would be our provider action prior to these change conversations, because at the very first webinar, I kind of gave an example of what it might be for a provider to come up to me and say, Jane, you need to lose weight. You need to go home and quit eating all that junk food, and that's what you need to do. So next time I see you, I want to see you that you have changed your eating habits and lost weight. Well, some providers might think that's an effective conversation, but to me, that might make me very defensive. It might make me feel like I don't want to talk to you and I don't want to lose weight. So we have to establish that rapport before we start having those change conversations. And part of doing that is just getting that information from our clients. What do they understand about their health condition? We're not talking to them about changing it. We're just getting some information about what they understand. We can also elicit what they understand about the consequences of not changing their behaviors or their health conditions. Some people do have a very good understanding of not changing their behaviors. Other people don't. Maybe they've heard a word, but they don't really know what it means. And so that can be a good point of us providing some education to them. But we need to really non-judgmentally hear that client perspective. Maybe they really don't think it's of value to lose weight. They know that not losing weight may cause them to have hypertension or whatever, but it's not really of value to them. And so we have to kind of be able to have that conversation. Provide the information concerning the health condition in a collaborative, conversational manner. So we talked about that. Understanding what they already know and what the client already knows and understands. Now this webinar, we're really going to focus on this last part of this features of health behavior change. Keeping plan change small and achievable. And how we can do that is offer different choices for change, and respect client autonomy in choosing what they'd like to change. We can help the client develop an action plan with specific goals, which we'll talk about, but those have to be collaboratively set and agreed upon. Me creating a goal for my client on my own because I think it's a good idea, and probably is because I have the background to determine what would be a healthy goal. They may not agree with that, and then that's not going to go anywhere. We can help the client explore barriers that can prevent change, and we're going to talk about that in our action plans. We've already talked about that the client is the expert on themselves, and they know what changes are realistic for them. And then we can help our clients develop coping skills and strategies for those times when they may lapse or may have barriers or things happen. So we can offer support and focus on their achievements rather than their inabilities or their lapse in behavior. And lastly, the support confidence to change. We want to have follow-up sessions, provide support, and monitor progress. And those are the things we're going to talk about today. Okay, so here's some question stems, and I think maybe you practiced these already, so I'm not going to go over them in too much detail. But when we were practicing that elicit, provide, elicit, here's some things that we can say to our clients. Or ask them, what things make you think this is a problem for you? We may discover they don't think it's a problem. Or how has whatever's going on stopped you from doing what you want to do? And that's always a good way to start a conversation about a health behavior change. We talked about this already, asking them what worries them about their condition, or what can they imagine happening to you, looking like, in 5 years, how do you see yourself? What do you think will happen if you don't make a change? And this is one of my favorite questions to start a conversation about this is, how would things be better if you could magically not have your condition? And sometimes that's a good way for people to really think about what their health condition is doing in their life. And if it magically could go away, what would be different? So I think that's always a good way to really start a conversation about change. And this last one is, what would your partner, your spouse, your daughter, your family member say about your condition? And that's another way to start the conversation. Okay, so now we've gotten what they understand about their health condition. Now we want to know if they understand the consequences of their health condition. Now they may have already received lots and lots of information, but that doesn't mean they understand the consequences. So we can just ask them, do you know why you should try to make this behavioral change? Or if you made the change, is there something you could do that you cannot do now? Kind of getting them to think about those consequences. I also like this one. Have you made the change already? Some people may think they've already made changes. And so we need to acknowledge that and give them support in whatever little change that might be. They may think, yeah, I've already done this. I've already started working on changing, even though I may not be seeing that. And then I'm just asking them if they have an idea of what things they need to do to make the change. Some people are overwhelmed with change. I know I am in life quite a lot. There's changes that need to be made, and I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. And so sometimes our patients are there too. So we're assuming we have a good foundational rapport. We've got a good understanding of what they know and what they know about their consequences. Now we want to start helping them make some goals for their behavior change. And so again, these are goals they set with you. They're not goals I set for them. So things I may ask them, what sorts of things do you think you might be able to do? Let's just start there. Before you make a suggestion, we talked about this in the elicit format, ask the client permission. Would it be all right if I gave you some more information about this? Would it be all right if I gave you a suggestion? All of us like to give advice. Well, I won't say all of us, but a lot of people like to give advice. And you can think about your own self and how you react to people giving you advice when you don't really want it. So always just acknowledging that they can give you permission and that they have autonomy to do that is always a good way to build rapport too. You can ask them about previous attempts to change behavior, what worked, what didn't. Ask them what their plan is. What do you specifically plan to do? How do you think you'll go about it? They may already have a plan. We just need to listen to what it is. How confident do you feel you can achieve this on a scale of 0 to 10? We went over that confidence ruler last time, and we'll go over it a little bit more today. And how will you know, this is really important, how will you know your plan is working? So I make a plan in collaboration with my client. How will we know it's working? How will we monitor it? Because there's nothing worse than implementing a plan and never really realizing that it worked or didn't work. You just keep doing the same old thing over and over again. So those are important. So as we're making our change plans, we've kind of set our goals now, kind of developed our plan, but now we need to think about what's going to happen when there's a difficult situation, because that always happens in anything. You know, you're a smoker and you're doing good quitting smoking, and then something really stressful happens in your life. You get fired or something like that. What are you going to do when a stressful event happens? So we want to help them make contingency plans. If a stressful event happens, then I will do this instead of starting to smoke again. So they already have something ahead in their mind planned. If they do lapse, we can discuss why they lapsed, what happened, and how did they feel after their lapse. And this is really important to process, because a lot of times people feel like losers. They did this plan, they tried really hard, and then they lapsed, and why try again? But everybody lapses at one time or another. I won't say, I guess there's probably a few people who never lapse, but most people do lapse at one time or another, and that's normal. And so we want to support them in that and help them develop a better plan for if something reoccurs, so they may have a different response than lapsing. And then just talking to them about if a lapse occurs or something occurs that kind of is a barrier or a problem for their action plan, letting them come up with how they're going to deal with it. What do they think they're going to do now? I don't have to rush in and fix it for them. I can talk to them about how they're going to fix it themselves and support them in that. Something that people often lack is confidence to change, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of changes that you have to make in your life. So these are things that question stems we can have to have a conversation to help build confidence with our clients. What makes you think that if you did decide to make the change, you could do it? Now that on the surface may sound negative, but really it's asking the client to look and to self-reflect and think about, well, I can do it. And this is why I can do it, because I'm stubborn or because whatever. What do you think would work for you if you decide to change? Again, letting them come up with the ideas. What strengths do you have that will help you succeed? And who could offer you helpful support in making this change? This is important too, because sometimes change is very difficult. And if there is a support person available besides yourself as a healthcare provider, it's important to include them in the plan if it's an important part of this person's life. A friend, a relative, a neighbor, whatever is going on, you can include them in that. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to making change plans. This is just kind of an overview of how we can start those conversations with clients. So if you have a question about this section, now would be the time probably to post it if we want to talk about something specifically. I'll just give it a second. Okay, well, I don't see anything in the chat box, so we'll move on. So making a change plan. So there's several different kinds of change plans. And like I said, most of you are probably familiar with some sort of care plan or something like that, but really focused on health. And that is, we are focused on health, but we're focused on changing behaviors related to health here in motivational interviewing. So I won't be writing goals about oxygen saturations necessarily. I'll be writing goals about behaviors like, you know, so-and-so is going to be wearing their portable oxygen tank when going out or something like that. Okay. So when we make a change or action plan, again, it has to be something the client wants. We have to make the goals in collaboration. We have to talk about what obstacles or barriers there might be beforehand. We don't want to wait for them to come up. Talk about how the person's going to respond to those obstacles or barriers if they occur, what the action plan is and the timeline. Okay, so just saying I'm going to eat better. Great. We don't know what that is. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know how we're going to measure it, so that's probably not a great goal. Identify others that can support them, and then how the patient is going to know that their action plan is working. What outcomes are they working towards? So we want to set goals, and probably most of you are familiar with SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, but I just wanted to go over them very briefly. When we're making our goals for our health behavior change plan, we want them to be in the SMART format. But I like this particular visual because they give you some ideas of what specific might mean. We want them to be significant for the person. This is a significant goal. It's not just just something specific but not meaningful. We want it to be measurable. We want it to be motivational for them. We want it to be achievable, though, as well. That's under attainable. And we want it to be relevant to their life, which falls under realistic. And then under timely, we want it to be tangible and trackable. So I just like some of these other words that this visual gives, and that's how come I wanted to share that with you. Instead of just thinking about it in a specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, we want to think about it in words that are in the context of the person's life. It's significant for them, it's meaningful for them, it's achievable for them, it's relevant in the context of their life, and they are able to see a tangible outcome from it in their life. So I give you an example here. To help me add more activity to my routine, I will walk from my car to the hospital rather than taking the shuttle at least 3 times per week starting tomorrow. Okay, so that's a goal in the context of their life. And actually, this is in the context of my life when I worked at the hospital and I had to park, 18 miles away. How easy it was to hop on the shuttle to get to the hospital when I could really walk if I left early enough and gave myself time. So this is something I could integrate into my own life in a regular way for activity. So when we make a brief action plan, that's just something very brief on that specific thing. Like, I'm going to not take the shuttle 3 times a week. I'm going to walk from my car to the hospital. So we can have those conversations with our clients. We can ask these 3 questions. Is there anything you'd like to do for your health in the next week or 2? I'd like to be more active. Okay, so I'm going to walk from my car to the hospital in the next week. How confident are you, or do you feel about carrying out the plan? I think I could do it 3 times a week. I rate that at 8 in confidence. What would you like to set a specific time to check back in with me so we can review how things are going with your plan? That's that follow-up, tangible, supportive, giving that, providing self-efficacy for that patient. So those are 3 easy questions. You don't have to have a big plan to do that. You can do that every time you interact with a patient. 5 skills that you might want to have would be presenting a behavioral menu. So that's kind of that agenda setting, right? I'm not going to say, this is what you need to do. If they're having a hard time coming up with things, I might give them a menu of items they could choose from. Then we're going to go through the SMART goals. We're going to elicit a commitment, how confident they are. We're going to talk about some collaborative problem solving if there's an issue, and then we're going to provide follow-up. So that's just a brief. You can do that every time you meet with a patient. Doesn't even have to be in a written plan, as long as you follow up with it. And then, of course, then you have to document that, so that is written. Okay, so this is in your packet of materials that Maddie's going to send to you, but this is just a brief action planning checklist. I know you can't read it very well, but when you get the file, you can look at it. And it has those 3 questions: eliciting the person's preferences or desires for behavior change, evaluating their confidence, and arranging follow-up. And so you can have this little form that is just right in front of you when you're meeting with your patient, kind of check, not very complicated, scan it into their EHR or whatever you're doing to provide some evidence that you're doing this and help you through the conversation. Okay, so I think we have time to watch this video. So I'd like for you to watch this little YouTube video. It's 5 minutes long. It's through the AHRQ, the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research. And they have some great resources on making brief action plans. And so if we can watch this 5-minute video, it's a little dated when you look at the people. You'll think, oh, it's a little dated, but I think it gives you some good examples. And then you can tell me if you're doing this already in your own work. And so Maddie's going to try to get the video up here.
No, maybe.
We have it except for no volume.
Can anybody hear the video that's playing? Okay. We didn't test audio on this. So.
Okay, well that's all right. We can skip it. You have the link there on the PowerPoint slide, and so you can watch it on your own if you want. It's 5 minutes long, and it gives you some great examples of brief action planning, and it has different healthcare providers doing the follow-up. I just like their examples. One's a guy, I think he's like an ex-Marine, an older guy that's an ex-Marine, and he's going to increase his exercise. And so he starts out saying, I can do 100 push-ups this week. That's what I'm going to do. And then the healthcare provider's like, well, how confident are you that you could do 100 push-ups this week? And then he's like, well, maybe I could do 10 push-ups this week. And so then they talk about making a reasonable action plan. And then so he does his 10 push-ups, and then they do a phone call follow-up. And so it's just kind of I just think the video shows it in a very easy format where you can see it really being integrated into your work life and not being very complicated. So sometimes these things we talk about, you think, oh, this is so complicated, I can't really do it. But this would be an easy one. Okay, so we'll get back to the PowerPoint and move on. But the link is there, and it's just AHRQ website, and you can just type in AHRQ action plan, and it'll bring you to there. Okay, so they also have a tool, which I put the link there for you, that you can use, and that will, I believe, also be in your file or your set of files that Maddie sends you. And again, it just walks you through the process of making a brief action plan, has some very easy ways to do that. One of them's a visual where they show people exercising, people eating right, different things, and then they also have a visual of a stoplight that's red, yellow, and green, and the person uses the stoplight to evaluate their confidence level. So it's just another way to do that, to meet maybe people who respond better to visual learning rather than words and reading. So they have a good resource there for you. But then you can see the little diagram I have here is when I follow up with my patient, I'll ask them, how did it go with your plan this week? And then it gives you some responses to success. We want to recognize that. Partial success, that's okay. We still want to recognize that. Or they did not try or had no success. Then reassure them that it's a common occurrence and reevaluate and set a new action plan. Because the last part of that visual is me asking them, what would you like to do next? So we just kind of go through that process. But it's a brief process. You can do it with anybody. You can use some of these written resources if you want to, or you can just make your own, or whatever works for you. Okay. So coping plan. So part of our action plan is to help them develop a coping plan. I talked about when something triggers a behavior that they're trying to change. And so we can ask them, what did they do in the past when they felt like smoking? Or when in the past did they feel like smoking? Every time I went to the bar, I felt like smoking. Every time I was playing cards, I felt like smoking, whatever. And then we can talk about the effects of those triggers. What did you like about smoking? I liked it. It helped me relax. It gave me something to do with my hands, whatever, different things. Because when you're talking about behavior, health behavior, or any other kind of behavior, you have to think of it in the context that that behavior is doing something for the person. So just telling them, don't smoke, quit smoking. What else are they going to replace that behavior with that is positive and healthy? And we need to help them identify what that is. So if it's that I need to have something to do with my hands, maybe we want to talk about other ways or other activities they could to keep their hands busy. What is it called? A fidget, or a fidget spinner, or different things like that, right? So we can be creative, but we first have to have that conversation. And so I think sometimes in behavioral health, people do this a lot, but I think sometimes in healthcare, we don't necessarily really connect that even health behaviors serve a purpose for that patient, negative or positive, and we have to figure out how we're going to replace that behavior. And then use reflective listening at talking about the triggers and the effects of the behavior, and help match the trigger with the effect. and I'll give you an example of that in a second, and then create the coping plan with that provide illicit strategy, and talking about ways they could manage triggers and still gain the desired behavioral effect. So here's an example of what that might look like. We have a worksheet. Again, you can do it in a table format like this, or you could do it on just a piece of paper or a whiteboard. It doesn't really matter. Where you talk with the patient about what are the triggers that cause the behavior of smoking or whatever it is you're talking about. What are the effects they experience when they smoke? And what are some strategies they could use to address when those triggers happen, or when they think they want to have that effect of relaxation or keeping their hands busy or different things like that. So some examples I give here: identify the situations, people, places, thoughts, feelings in which you were or are most likely to smoke, most likely to not exercise, most likely to call 911, whatever is going on. What situations cause that, trigger that? Then identify what you liked about the event, because that's the effect, right? Well, when I call 911, then somebody nice comes out to my house and talks to me and gives, and I have some company or whatever it is that's going on, or makes me feel more secure or safe. And then list those triggers and effects to the behavior and draw a line between the ones that go together, and then identify other ways, what ways other than smoking or whatever the behavior is that they can achieve those positive effects. Again, bringing in family members or support people if that's appropriate, and then identifying strategies for coping with those triggers while still achieving that desired effect of I'm relaxed, I have something to do with my hands, I have company, I feel safe, whatever it is the effect is. So this is a format you can use to have those conversations with your clients and really focus in, hone in on what is causing the behavior and what the client is getting out of the behavior, so we can make an effective strategy to address it. I don't know if you guys have used that kind of format before or not. If you have, has anybody done that? Couple people in the room here say yes, they have. So I hope you guys have too. If not, this is something you could try and see if it works with your population. Okay. So another brief motivational interviewing thing you can do is called the frames format. It stands for feedback, responsibility, advice, menu, empathetic, and support. Again, this is another brief motivational interviewing framework. We don't need to have 3 hours to do this. It's something we can do with an action plan or an interaction with our client. We can give feedback of the client's status relative to their baseline. So we get that feedback through the open-ended questions, reflective listening, and different things like that. So we have a little feedback, how's it going with you? What's going on with your behavior changes that you're trying to do? Different things. Our responsibility. Clarify the client and provider roles, that you are there to support them and to provide information for them or resources for them, but you are not there to change their behavior, because you can't change their behavior. They have to change their behavior. So making sure that the client understands that they are engaged in the process is a collaborative process. Advice to change. So advice, A is for advice, that clarify you're there to assist in partnership and collaboration to develop goals and strategies and offer advice, again, when requested. Menu of options from which to choose. M is for menu. So you can assist by offering suggestions on strategies. First, asking permission. Can I offer you some suggestions of different things you might try to quit smoking? Then you're not going to choose which strategy the client decides upon, but you're going to offer them a menu of different things they could choose from. Empathy is for an empathetic provider, that you provide empathy, assisting in the transition from ambivalence in change to that they really want to change. And understanding that for a lot of people, this is a very difficult process for them. They have these behaviors that they're trying to change, they may have had for many, many years. And you can even think about yourself and your own interpersonal reactions that we've learned growing up as children. Maybe we've learned some dysfunctional communication styles or anger management styles or whatever. And so, those behaviors are ingrained, and it takes a long time and a lot of effort to change those behaviors. And so just understanding that it's a process and being empathetic with them through that. And then support for their self-efficacy, that you're going to provide, that the provider is going to focus on their ability to change and a positive sense of self. So that's a FRAMES network. So this is, or FRAMES framework. So this is something you can, if you like acronyms, you can use this acronym to kind of direct your interactions. Okay, so I think that's it for the brief motivational interviewing that I wanted to go over. We have the frames, and then we went over the brief action planning. Those are two things that are brief motivational interviewing techniques that we could try and see if they work for you. And then again, when you're making your action plan, or if you want to call it a care plan or whatever it is you call it in your workplace, making sure that you're looking at it from a SMART goal perspective, but contextually in the client's life. So really looking at those other words besides specific, measurable, looking at that it's meaningful, and it's, what was the word? Meaningful and significant for that patient. Okay, so then I was just going to go over some brief review. And so hopefully by the end of these 3 webinars, you've learned that the do's of motivational interviewing are to reflectively listen. And that doesn't mean just parroting back what somebody says, but really trying to decode what that client is saying to you. And then doing some reflective paraphrasing or open-ended questionings to really engage in understanding that more. Looking for opportunities to empathize with them, not sympathize. That's a lesson I learned when I first started in residential treatment when I was 20 years old. It's very easy to be sympathetic. That means you feel sorry for someone, you pity them. And some people's lives are really horrendous, and you do pity them. But that's not helpful in the sense of behavior change. We want to empathize with where they're at and the struggles that they're having, but show them that we have confidence in their ability to change and support them through that. Look for opportunities to validate the client's perspective. Sometimes we don't understand the client's perspective, or we don't agree with it, but it is their perspective, and they're entitled to it. And look for opportunities to focus on current or past positive efforts or successes and incentives for change. So those are things we do want to do, actually not just in motivational interviewing, but in all of our interactions with our clients. We want to try to be this kind of person, provider, because it'll develop rapport. Don't. These are things we don't want to do. And I don't know why there's 2 apostrophes on that. I got apostrophe crazy at the top there. But we don't want to scold them. Again, you can consider yourself how you react when people scold you or lecture you about something, or judge, or you feel judged by somebody, or they accuse you of something. So we don't want to do those things, and we don't want to assume to know what the client should do. And I think this is something as healthcare providers can be difficult for us, because we have a lot of education and training, and we actually probably do know what the client should do for their own health, but they're the expert on them, and I don't know their life. I don't know their story. I don't know the context of what's going on with them, and so I can't assume that what I know the client, I can't assume that I know what the client should do. I need to talk to them about it, and we can come up with a collaborative agreement about it. And so an example I give here of a common question that I've heard in healthcare is, why haven't you? I put begun to exercise regularly, but you can put in whatever you want there. Why haven't you done X? I hear providers ask clients that all the time, and that comes across as kind of a judging, accusatory conversation. And so, again, words have value, and we have to think about what kind of words we're using and if they are supportive of a good therapeutic relationship or not, and if they are patient-centered or not. So you can use, if you're an acronym person, I give you another one, the RULE acronym. You can resist the writing reflex, which means I know what's right. I'm going to tell you what's right. We can resist that and focus on the therapeutic relationship. We can, U means is for understanding your client's motivations, being empathetic, listening to their sustain and change talk or their ambivalence. L is for listen to your client, active listening, not just reflection of content. And empower, E is for empower, reinforce strengths and elicit what they think they can do to improve their health. We want to empower them because that's part of our patient activation and patient engagement. So the takeaways, and I think this is the last slide because we're done a little bit early today because we didn't have our role play, but remember I said last week we want to dance, not wrestle, and here is my picture of a wrestler dancing. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but this is how we want to be when we're interacting with our clients. We want to be in this happy dancing place, not all tense and stressed in the wrestling spot there. So we cannot make someone else change. We have to realize that the client is the expert on themselves, just as you are the expert on yourself. We want to establish a good rapport. We want to allow clients to resolve their ambivalence. Ambivalence is a normal part of the change process. And dance, not wrestle. If you feel like you're wrestling, step back, review your rapport, review your therapeutic relationship, review what kind of communication you're using, what kind of words you're using, because something maybe isn't quite as it should be if you're feeling like you're struggling. And whenever I think about that, I think about, I have 3 girls, they're grown now, but I think about them as teenage girls, and I felt like I was wrestling all the time. And so now when I think about it, I remember how that felt, and it's like, wow, if I get that feeling, I need to step back and say, okay, what can I do differently here? So those are the takeaways, and then that I have for you. And then if you guys want to share, I would be interested in this closing reflection, or you can just think about it internally too. During these last few sessions, I learned what? Hopefully you learned something. I remembered something you already knew, that you already were doing. I noticed something about myself. I noticed something about my workplace. I noticed something about my clients. I appreciated. Hopefully through these 3 sessions, you found something you could appreciate. I appreciate how hardworking my clients are on certain things. I appreciate the support of my coworkers. I appreciate having an opportunity to think about new concepts or concepts that I haven't thought about in a while. And lastly, in my work, and here I'd like you to kind of reflect upon, have you done anything different the last couple of weeks? Or do you plan on doing something different? And in your brief action plan, in the next week or 2, what are you going to do different? And I would follow up with you, but I'm not able to do that. But you could make a brief action plan. You're on your own with your coworkers, and you can hold each other accountable with follow-up if that's what you want to do too. So those are things that you can think about, and hopefully you have some positive takeaways there. And then, like I said, Maddie's sending you a bunch of files, or should have already posted them on the site, but they're from today. There should be a file called Make Action Plans Tool 15 from the AHRQ. There should be a file called Health Goals It's another way to do a brief action plan with someone. And then that one that I showed on the slide. There should be that one as well. So you should have 3, the brief action planning self-management support tool for chronic illness care, health, and wellness coaching. So you should have 3 brief action planning tools that you could use that you can try out. You also should have something called the Enlighten exercise. So it's a way, yes, there it is, that you can, it's just a little activity you could do with your client talking about when they're in that ambivalent stage. And it says it has the client list 5 things they've been procrastinating about doing and plan to take some action on at least one of them this week. So it's another form of a brief action plan. And then there's a bunch of resources, books, and websites should be there. And then the 2 that we went over last week should be there, the tip sheets that you can put in your folder or whatever it is that you take with you when you go out to see your clients. Those should all be there. So hopefully that leaves you with some tools and some ideas to practice these skills. And I think that's all I have to say. Do you guys have any questions?
If you guys do have any questions, you guys can unmute yourself or even just type it in the chat box and we'll be able to get it here.